never thought I'd come back here. The Bennett estate. The place where I spent my childhood feeling like I didn't matter. Where my every choice was measured against Ethan's, and always found lacking. For years, I carried the weight of their expectations and the sting of their disappointment. They wanted me to follow a path I couldn't love, to chase a career in business while my heart was drawn to something entirely different. Something greater than simply pleasing them. Now at 30 I return, not as the disobedient daughter, not as the one they always dismissed, but as Claire Bennett, a colonel in the United States Army. Every step toward that dinner table is heavy with memory, and yet light with purpose. I sit quietly as the conversation swirls around me. Their words sharp, their glances dismissive. They still see the girl who walked away, the failure who chose the military over family business. But tonight I will not argue. Tonight I will not beg for recognition. My achievements are not theirs to award. They exist in every decision I've made, every mission I've led, every challenge I've faced and conquered. And soon they will see that respect is not demanded. It is earned. If you're still listening, we want to sincerely thank you for spending your time with us. Truly means a lot. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments and let's see how far this message has reached. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I highly recommend doing it now so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. These aren't just ordinary stories. They're filled with meaningful life lessons that can inspire, teach, and stay with you long after the video ends. Hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. The evening air was cool, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves and distant city traffic as I approached the Bennett estate. 5 years had passed since I walked away from this house, from the life my family had envisioned for me. A life measured by corporate success, by numbers on a ledger, by the approval of a father who seemed incapable of seeing past his own ambitions. I had left not out of anger, though anger had certainly festered, but out of necessity. My path was not theirs to dictate, and I had chosen it fully, wholeheartedly, in service of something far greater than family approval, purpose, integrity, and honor. Now, standing at the front door, I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the echo of old insecurities, the ghost of countless times my accomplishments had been ignored or minimized. Yet I was no longer the girl they had dismissed. I was Claire Bennett, a colonel in the United States Army, a woman who had faced realities they could not fathom, commanded operations they would never understand, and earned respect in ways that could not be disputed. And still I hesitated at the threshold, taking a deep breath before entering, knowing that the evening would test my patience, my composure, and my resolve in ways subtle but piercing. The door opened before I could knock. My mother, Margaret, greeted me with a polite smile, her eyes reflecting cautious curiosity. "Claire, welcome home," she said softly, the words carefully measured. Her tone was warm enough to suggest courtesy, but withheld enough familiarity to remind me that she had always placed Ethan's success above mine. I stepped inside, feeling the polished hardwood floors beneath my boots, the grand chandelier casting a soft glow that did little to illuminate the invisible walls of judgment and expectation I had grown up within. Father, Richard, was already seated at the head of the table, a man whose presence was as imposing as it was silent. He looked up briefly, gave a nod that lacked enthusiasm, and returned to reviewing documents. My brother, Ethan, perched opposite me with the casual confidence of someone who had been told he was destined for greatness his entire life. He barely glanced in my direction, absorbed in recounting some recent achievement to our father, the familiar pattern playing out with precision. His successes celebrated, mine dismissed or ignored. I took my seat quietly, adjusting my posture to convey neither defensiveness nor submission. Inwardly, I counted my breaths, preparing myself to endure the subtle barbs and the unspoken judgments that would inevitably follow. This dinner was not an opportunity for confrontation. It was a test of restraint, a rehearsal in maintaining dignity in a space that had never been designed to acknowledge it. The first exchange came almost immediately. Father spoke, glancing at Ethan with barely concealed pride. "So the Westbridge merger is progressing nicely, I hear. Ethan, your projections are impressive as always." He tapped the edge of his glass, punctuating the praise with a sense of finality. The words were not spoken harshly, but they carried weight I had carried as criticism in reverse, always measuring me against a brother who seemed incapable of failure. Mother chimed in, her voice smooth, cultured, highlighting yet another of Ethan's accomplishments. It's wonderful how you manage both the technical and managerial aspects with such precision. Truly admirable, Ethan. She smiled at him, a gesture that was warm yet exclusive, as if inclusion were a privilege he had earned while I was simply tolerated. I held my silence, letting their words wash over me like a tide I could not alter. Each compliment they lavished on Ethan, each subtle comparison, each glance of measured approval, reinforced the invisible hierarchy they had imposed. And yet, this time, their judgments could not reach me in the way they once had. I had been forged in situations far harsher than parental disapproval. I had led troops under fire, made decisions with life or death consequences, and navigated challenges that dwarfed the petty measures of familial expectation. Ethan, noticing my quiet composure, attempted to engage me in conversation with a polite, almost perfunctory question. "Claire, how's the army treating you these days?" His tone was casual, perhaps even respectful on the surface, but underneath there was a subtle doubt, a subconscious expectation that I would downplay my achievements, that I would diminish my own accomplishments to conform to the narrative they preferred. I replied evenly. "The army is challenging, demanding, and rewarding. I've been overseeing several operations that require strategic planning and coordination across multiple units." I paused, letting the words hang. I was deliberately concise, providing enough detail to assert my authority without inviting debate or jealousy. My voice was calm, measured, carrying the quiet confidence of someone who knew her worth without needing affirmation. Father looked up briefly, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly. He did not ask for specifics, perhaps confident in his assumption that military endeavors were trivial compared to corporate gains. Mother's expression was polite but guarded, as if evaluating whether my presence might disrupt the familiar balance of admiration focused on Ethan. And Ethan? He looked at me with something akin to surprise, his eyes widening slightly, recognizing for the first time that his sister had grown into a presence he could not casually dismiss. Conversation moved on, with topics flitting from business to local news, but the undertone of judgment persisted. Father made a subtle comment about career choices, implying that the army was a less practical path. Mother interjected with gentle concern, referencing the sacrifices inherent in military life, framed in a way that suggested regret rather than pride. Ethan shared anecdotes from work, interspersed with jokes at my expense, light-hearted in tone but laden with a quiet comparison. I listened without interruption. Each remark, each subtle slight, each faintly amused glance became data points, catalogued in the careful mental ledger I had constructed over years of similar encounters. The difference now was that I was not internally collapsing, not seeking validation, not reacting with frustration. I was observing, analyzing, and allowing the pattern to reveal itself in its entirety. My accomplishments were invisible to them, yes, but the impact I had created, the authority I wielded, was real and undeniable. And I knew, as surely as I sat there, that recognition would come, not through argument or insistence, but through the quiet, unyielding weight of reality. At one point, Father leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine, and casually remarked, "It's interesting to see how different paths unfold. Ethan, of course, chose the predictable route, but some people must take the road less traveled, I suppose." The comment was subtle yet pointed. It was not a compliment. It was an attempt to frame my career choice as aberrant, an acknowledgement couched in minimization. I smiled faintly, a gesture that was small but deliberate. "Yes," I replied evenly, "but sometimes the road less traveled leads to results that are measurable and impactful in ways others might not immediately see." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of experience, discipline, and achievement accumulated over years. Mother's fork paused midair, her gaze flicking toward me with curiosity. Ethan blinked, an almost imperceptible tension appearing in his jawline. Father's eyes narrowed, perhaps assessing whether he had underestimated the depth behind my quiet composure. The silence that followed was telling, a subtle acknowledgement that while my accomplishments had been ignored before, they were real, present, and undeniable. As the meal continued, I maintained my posture of calm engagement. I asked questions sparingly, listened attentively, and offered insight only when appropriate, allowing my presence to speak as loudly as my words. I could feel the shift in energy around the table, imperceptible but undeniable. The invisible hierarchy that had long dictated our interactions was beginning to crack, replaced by a subtle awareness that the daughter they had once dismissed possessed authority, intellect, and capability they could not ignore. By the end of the evening, there was no dramatic confrontation, no overt declaration of superiority. Yet the impact of my presence, of my quiet dignity and implied achievements, had reshaped the room. Father's glances were measured, no longer purely dismissive. Mother's smile carried warmth and curiosity rather than gentle condescension. Ethan, for the first time, regarded me with something resembling acknowledgement, a recognition that his sister had grown into a figure who could not be casually underestimated. I left the dining room that night with a sense of calm satisfaction. The bickering, the subtle undermining, the invisible dismissals, all of it had failed to penetrate the shield I had constructed through experience, resilience, and self-belief. I understood now that the power of achievement is not dependent on recognition from others. It is realized in the quiet strength it gives to the one who earns it, in the unshakable confidence that comes from knowing one's own worth. Walking through the familiar hallways, hearing the muted laughter and conversation behind me, I felt a profound sense of liberation. This dinner had been a test, a performance of restraint and composure, and I had passed. My accomplishments, my dedication, and my strategic mind had spoken for me where words alone could not. And though my family may not yet fully understand or embrace it, I knew that the foundation had been laid for recognition, respect, and perhaps one day reconciliation, not through demands or arguments, but through the undeniable force of a life lived with integrity and purpose. That night I realized the first crucial lesson of the evening. Silence, when paired with confidence and action, can be far more powerful than any retort. By choosing not to fight for acknowledgement, by holding firm to my own sense of value, I allowed reality itself to convey the truth of my achievements. My family's inability to see my accomplishments was a reflection of their perspective, not a measure of my worth. And so the dinner ended, plates cleared, glasses emptied, and the house settled into quiet. Yet within me a fire burned brighter than ever. The world, my family included, could no longer define me by their expectations. My achievements, my service, and my dedication to something greater than approval had set the stage for a new chapter, one where respect would be earned, acknowledgement would be tangible, and my value would be self-determined rather than externally validated. The morning sun had barely risen over the city skyline when I stepped out of the sleek black government vehicle in front of Westbridge Technologies. The glass facade of the building reflected the first pale light of day. A world that once had felt like home now seeming simultaneously familiar and alien. 5 years ago, I would have walked past these doors as just Claire Bennett, the daughter of Richard and Margaret Bennett, the sister of Ethan, whose accomplishments seemed always to eclipse mine in the eyes of everyone who mattered at this address. Today I was no longer that girl. Today I was a colonel in the United States Army, the authorized representative of the Department of Defense, with final decision-making authority on the Silvercrest Defense Initiative, a project critical to national security, and one that Logan, my brother, had been leading in its technical phase. The lobby was bustling with employees and security personnel, but as soon as my uniformed presence became apparent, conversations paused, eyes lifted, and a subtle murmur of recognition spread. This uniform, the insignia of rank sewn meticulously on my shoulders, carried with it not just authority but the tangible evidence of years of rigorous training, leadership under pressure, and hard-earned accomplishment. It was a silent declaration. I belonged here not because of family ties, not because of chance, but because of merit, expertise, and earned respect. I walked through the automatic doors, the echo of my boots against the polished marble floor punctuating the shift in energy around me. My father's office was on the executive floor, as was Logan's workspace. The glass-walled meeting rooms glinted with morning sunlight, revealing colleagues deep in discussion, unaware that the arrival they were about to witness would alter the dynamic of the entire organization. I had rehearsed my entrance countless times in my mind, yet nothing could have prepared me for the mix of disbelief, surprise, and barely concealed tension that greeted me as I entered the executive floor. Employees who had known me casually as Claire, Ethan's sister, now recognized the embodiment of authority standing before them. Even the CEO, who prided himself on his control over corporate affairs, met my gaze with a flicker of uncertainty, the subtle acknowledgement that I was not a visitor but the final arbiter in the room. Logan stood just outside the main conference room, clutching a stack of technical reports, clearly expecting a routine briefing with familiar oversight. His eyes widened ever so slightly as he took in my uniform, the crisp lines of the army dress, the medals and insignia that marked years of service and command. He opened his mouth, perhaps to make a sarcastic comment, or perhaps to assert some illusory dominance over his own project, but he stopped, caught in the reality of the situation. Today, I held the authority that he had never imagined I would wield, and it was not theoretical. It was real, immediate, and undeniable. I entered the room where the executives, including my father and Logan, had assembled. The chatter stopped abruptly. All eyes were on me. The silence was thick, almost tangible, charged with the tension of unspoken judgments and the anticipation of recognition deferred for too long. I could sense the collective mental calculations running through their minds. Who is she? What authority does she have? And more critically, why does she command attention that none of us anticipated? "Good morning," I said, my voice steady, carrying the resonance of someone accustomed to command, of someone whose words could shape outcomes and shift realities. "I am Colonel Claire Bennett, representing the Department of Defense. I have been assigned to oversee and approve the Silvercrest Defense Initiative. My role includes final decision-making authority regarding all project phases." The weight of the statement settled over the room like a physical presence. Logan's posture stiffened, a subtle flush coloring his face. My father raised an eyebrow, a silent signal of intrigue mixed with unease. Even the CEO, who rarely exhibited surprise, tilted his head, evaluating me with cautious attention. This was not a situation anyone had anticipated. I began the briefing. Unlike a typical presentation, this was a precise strategic deconstruction of the project's current status. I highlighted operational vulnerabilities, security risks, and potential logistical failures that could compromise the initiative. Every chart, every technical evaluation, every recommendation I made was backed by data, experience, and a strategic vision that drew directly from military operational standards. Logan interrupted at one point, attempting to interject with a suggestion for a minor adjustment in the timeline. I turned to him, maintaining eye contact, my expression calm yet firm. "Logan, I appreciate your insight, but the adjustment I am proposing accounts for risk management and operational continuity. Implementing it ensures the integrity of the project as a whole." He faltered. His voice wavered slightly as he processed that I was not merely making suggestions but issuing directives he was obligated to follow. This was the twist he had not anticipated. The sister he had spent years undermining now held not just authority, but actionable, enforceable authority in front of peers, executives, and even their father. Throughout the meeting, I could observe the subtle reactions. My father leaned forward in his chair, absorbing the strategic points I raised, a slow recognition dawning that the daughter he had dismissed as insignificant possessed knowledge, judgment, and leadership far beyond expectation. Logan's colleagues, who had always deferred to him as the technical genius, now glanced toward me for guidance, processing that the final word rested with someone they had barely respected. The tension escalated when I proposed a procedural shift that would reassign certain technical responsibilities. Logan hesitated, then glanced at the executives, clearly torn between pride and obligation. The CEO intervened, tentatively asking for clarification. I explained clearly and methodically, outlining how the realignment would mitigate risk and enhance operational efficiency. The room nodded, some in reluctant agreement, others in silent astonishment at the clarity and authority of my reasoning. Logan had no choice but to comply, taking note of directives and acknowledging my decisions aloud, a dramatic reversal of the power dynamics he had always assumed. At one point, I allowed myself a brief reflection, noting the subtle shift in the room. Authority had tangible power, and I wielded it not through arrogance but through expertise. My presence, reinforced by the uniform and reinforced by years of accomplishment, commanded attention and respect. Logan's initial defiance had evaporated under the weight of reality. He was no longer the unquestioned leader. I was now the ultimate decision-maker. By midday, the atmosphere had transformed. Skepticism had given way to attentive listening, resistance to thoughtful consideration. Executives who had dismissed my past experiences now took detailed notes, asked follow-up questions, and acknowledged the practical value of my directives. My father remained silent for most of the session, absorbing the evidence that his earlier judgments had been misplaced. Logan's initial tension softened into cautious respect, and colleagues who had once questioned my abilities now regarded my input as indispensable. During a brief break, Logan approached me. His expression was conflicted, a mixture of admiration, frustration, and the dawning realization of my capabilities. "Claire, I didn't expect," he trailed off, unsure how to articulate the shift in our relationship. I smiled faintly, offering reassurance without condescension. "I've been preparing for this for years, Logan. The work I've done speaks for itself." Returning to the meeting, the final hour focused on implementation and accountability. I delineated responsibilities, set deadlines, and clarified expectations. Each instruction reinforced the reality of my authority, and the executives responded with precision and compliance. Logan, once confident in his unchallenged control, now executed my directives in front of everyone, demonstrating a transformation not through confrontation but through recognition of competence. As the session concluded, the CEO acknowledged my contributions formally, noting the strategic insights that had enhanced the project's operational integrity. My father, still composed, offered a quiet nod, a subtle yet profound acknowledgement that his daughter had become a figure of influence he could no longer ignore. Logan followed suit, silently conveying his acceptance of the new dynamic. Walking out of the conference room, I felt the culmination of years of effort, resilience, and dedication settle around me. The twist, the undeniable recognition of my authority, competence, and value, was complete. My family, colleagues, and even the executives had witnessed the tangible results of my achievements. No words of praise could replicate the impact of action backed by experience, and today the reality of my power had spoken louder than any conversation could. In the quiet of the hallway, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. Authority and respect were not gifts. They were earned through expertise, dedication, and unwavering commitment. Today, I had demonstrated that recognition cannot be commanded but must be proven. Logan, my father, and the executives had no choice but to witness the undeniable truth. Claire Bennett, the daughter they once overlooked, was now a force whose decisions shaped outcomes, whose expertise commanded attention, and whose presence could no longer be ignored. The evening sky was painted in soft hues of amber and rose as I drove back to the Bennett estate. The events of the day still lingered vividly in my mind. The shift in dynamics at Westbridge Technologies, the silent acknowledgement of my authority, the subtle but undeniable recognition from executives and colleagues alike. Every directive I had issued, every decision I had enforced, had spoken louder than any words of approval I had once longed to hear from my family. Yet despite the validation from others, there remained a part of me that sought the quiet closure of familial recognition, not for the sake of ego, but for the long years of tension, judgment, and dismissal I had endured. Pulling into the driveway, I took a deep breath, savoring the crisp evening air, and reminded myself that this dinner was not about victory over my family. It was about presence, dignity, and authenticity. 5 years ago, this table had been a stage of judgment and comparison, where every achievement of mine was minimized and every success of Ethan was elevated to mythic proportions. Tonight, I would not fight for acknowledgement. I would allow reality, my reality, to speak for itself. As I entered the house, the familiar scent of roasted chicken and baked bread greeted me. My mother, Margaret, was bustling in the kitchen, moving with a careful grace that betrayed her underlying curiosity and cautious anticipation. "Claire," she said, her tone warm yet slightly uncertain, "I'm glad you're home." There was no overt praise, no exaggerated welcome, just a sincere acknowledgement that I had returned. It was a subtle shift, but one that carried immense weight. Father, Richard, was in the living room, reviewing financial reports with his customary intensity. When he looked up, his eyes met mine, and for the first time in years, I detected in them a flicker of respect, a quiet recognition that his daughter, once dismissed, once underestimated, had accomplished something far beyond the scope of his understanding. He did not speak immediately, choosing instead to let his gaze convey a depth of acknowledgement that words could not fully express. Ethan, seated near the doorway with a casual air, glanced toward me, and I noticed a hint of hesitation in his posture. He had been accustomed to dominance at every family gathering, the unspoken assumption that he would always lead, that his successes would overshadow mine. Today, that assumption had shifted irreversibly. He knew, just as I knew, that I had stepped into a sphere of competence and authority that could not be negated. We gathered in the dining room, the table set with care, the chandelier casting a warm glow over the familiar surroundings. I took my seat calmly, neither seeking affirmation nor asserting superiority. The room was quiet at first, the silence heavy with anticipation, as if every person present was subconsciously gauging the shift in dynamics, measuring the woman who had returned against the memory of the girl they had once overlooked. Father spoke first, his voice measured and deliberate. "Claire, I've been reviewing some of the developments you've overseen today," he began, and though his words were careful, they were imbued with genuine recognition. "It appears that your strategies have been effective, and the project is moving forward with precision." It was not effusive praise, nor was it exaggerated flattery. It was a factual acknowledgement of my accomplishments. And yet, it resonated with me more profoundly than any empty compliment ever could. Mother, following his lead, added, "I saw some of the correspondence from Westbridge. Your leadership seems exemplary. I'm proud of the focus and dedication you've maintained." Her words carried warmth and sincerity, a reflection not of obligation, but of respect that had grown organically through evidence of my capabilities. Ethan shifted in his seat, glancing at me with a mixture of admiration and reluctant acknowledgement. "Claire," he began, his voice tinged with uncertainty, "I didn't fully realize. You handled things today in a way I hadn't expected. You were precise, authoritative, and effective." He paused, the words struggling to bridge years of sibling rivalry and underestimation. "I guess I never really saw you as capable of this level of leadership." I studied him, seeing in his expression the complex interplay of surprise, humility, and emerging respect. I smiled softly, neither condescending nor triumphant, simply acknowledging the moment. "I've always been capable, Ethan. It's not about proving myself to you or anyone else. It's about knowing my own worth and acting on it." The rest of the dinner unfolded with a quiet, reflective rhythm. Conversation flowed naturally, punctuated by moments of genuine curiosity and engagement from my parents and Ethan. Father asked questions about the strategic challenges I had faced, demonstrating not only interest but a growing respect for the complexity and gravity of my decisions. Mother, usually careful with her words, engaged in detailed discussions about operational procedures and leadership approaches, treating my insights with seriousness and consideration. Logan's transformation was subtle but unmistakable. Where once he might have dominated the conversation or dismissed my input, he now listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions, demonstrating a willingness to integrate my perspectives into his understanding. The power dynamic had shifted entirely, not through confrontation, not through argument, but through undeniable demonstration of competence and command. I observed all of this quietly, taking note of the nuanced acknowledgments, the subtle adjustments in posture, tone, and attention. Respect, I realized, had arrived not as a verbal gift, but as a natural consequence of consistent, undeniable achievement. My family did not need to announce their recognition with florid declarations. It was evident in their engagement, their attentiveness, and their willingness to listen and integrate my insights. At one point, Father reached across the table, placing a hand lightly on mine. It was a gesture without ceremony, but it carried profound meaning. A quiet acknowledgement of recognition, approval, and perhaps even a touch of reconciliation. Mother mirrored the gesture with a gentle nod and a soft smile, signaling that the space between us had shifted, that the invisible walls of judgment had begun to dissolve. Ethan, ever perceptive, noticed the subtle cues. He looked at me, a complex mixture of admiration and humility reflected in his eyes. "Claire," he said softly, "I see now. I've been blind to what you've achieved and the path you've chosen. I respect you not just as my sister, but as someone who has earned every bit of this recognition." His words were quiet, unadorned, yet they carried the weight of years of unspoken rivalry, doubt, and familial tension finally being resolved. Throughout the evening, I remained present in the moment, allowing the acknowledgement and respect to unfold organically. This was not a performance, nor a calculated display of authority. It was the culmination of years of dedication, discipline, and unwavering commitment to my own path. I realized as I engaged in these quiet exchanges that the true power of achievement lies not in forcing others to recognize it, but in living it fully and authentically, allowing reality itself to demonstrate its value. Dinner concluded with a gentle ease, the atmosphere markedly different from any previous family gathering. There was laughter, conversation, and the subtle warmth of genuine engagement, free from judgment or comparison. The table that had once been a stage of condescension and expectation had been transformed into a space of mutual respect and recognition. As we rose from the table, I felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The journey had not been about altering my family's perceptions through argument or confrontation. It had been about embodying competence, integrity, and resilience, allowing these qualities to speak louder than words. My value had never been contingent upon their approval. It had always resided within the choices I had made, the actions I had taken, and the life I had built through my own resolve. Later, as I retreated to my room, the quiet of the house enveloped me. I reflected on the evening, on the subtle yet powerful acknowledgments that had transpired. Respect had been earned, recognition had been granted, and the dynamics that had long defined our interactions had shifted irrevocably. I felt a sense of peace, not from external validation, but from the knowledge that my worth had been demonstrated through tangible, undeniable action. In that moment, I understood a fundamental truth. True recognition and respect are not bestowed lightly, nor are they given freely based on sentiment or familial expectation. They are the product of sustained effort, measurable achievement, and unwavering adherence to one's principles. My family's acknowledgement, expressed not through grandiose words but through attentiveness, engagement, and sincere curiosity, was more meaningful than any superficial praise ever could be. I closed my eyes for a moment, allowing the realization to settle. The girl who had once been dismissed, whose choices had been questioned, whose accomplishments had been minimized, had returned not seeking approval, but bringing with her the undeniable proof of her capability, intelligence, and resilience. The Bua toy had transformed from a potential battlefield of judgment into a space of affirmation, not of words, but of genuine recognition born from lived experience. By the end of the night, I knew that this was not merely a familial reconciliation. It was a personal triumph, a testament to the power of self-determination, perseverance, and the ability to create undeniable results in the world. I had not only reclaimed my place within my family but had done so on my own terms, through merit, integrity, and the quiet but unassailable authority of achievement. And as I lay in bed that night, listening to the faint hum of the city outside, I felt a profound clarity. The journey to recognition had been long, often lonely, and filled with moments of doubt. But through it all, I had maintained a steadfast commitment to my own path, to my own sense of worth, and to the principle that action speaks far louder than words. The evening's culmination was not merely a dinner. It was the embodiment of that principle, a living affirmation that value is measured not by external approval, but by the courage, competence, and choices of the individual. I had arrived at a place of respect, not because it was granted, but because it had been earned. And in that arrival I finally understood. The true power of achievement is that it cannot be ignored, dismissed, or undermined. It reshapes perceptions, transforms relationships, and most importantly, solidifies the understanding that one's worth is ultimately defined not by the judgment of others, but by the tangible results of one's own actions.